All right, I guess we should get started here. Give me one quick second. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Tom McCaffrey. I'm the President and CEO of Supply Chain Canada Alberta Institute. We're here today with our second in this particular event within our technology adoption series. And our intention with this is to help supply chain professionals and companies in general to support technology adoption by demystifying the process and getting beyond the standard sales pitch to help improve outcomes for supply chain professionals and companies that are looking to adopt technologies. The way that technology is adopted is evolving, and so we're trying to sort of get some messages out and talk to some professionals that are experienced on the technology side and can kind of help you to look at what you're doing internally, and if you're seeking new technologies to adopt, understanding how to build those relationships and get better results or better outcomes as you walk through what is a very challenging process. So today we have Jeff Boyle, the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing for Vintri. And Vintri's platform core addresses common gaps in current processes by ensuring data is accurate and accessible for all systems. Core has successfully enabled operators to uncover, then resolve digital gaps and discrepancies in their asset data. So we're going to kind of stage this event a little bit differently than we did the last one. We're going to try to make it a little bit more interactive by having some polls, but we're going to kind of ask questions in three realms. First is some basic steps, because we want to look at some wins and some maybe lessons learned through the technology adoption process. So we'll also talk about project successes and failures. And that'll sort of get us to the end where we maybe do some final, well, we will do some final polls and kind of get a sense of where everybody's heads are at. So Daniel, if you want to maybe run the first poll, and then I'll ask some questions of Jeff.
Really hoping we get a lot of yeses on the first question.
Well, we would assume that that's going to be the case, but I guess you never know for sure. And actually, I guess while that's running, you and I can actually chat. So thanks for joining us today, Jeff.
Appreciate you having us back and having me back. And it was a really good first conversation, and excited to go a little bit more granular on some stuff.
Yeah.
I got a lot of good feedback on LinkedIn that individuals saw it as valuable, and we're always talking about we want to help the overall ecosystem, and hope to share some more knowledge in that target.
Great. So I guess that is kind of where the first question begins today. So from your perspective, what are the basic steps to implement a new technology?
I think there's so much out there right now about this is the silver lining of the current conditions. Our digital transformation is picking up, and certain organizations that were ahead of the digital transformation side, where you're hearing the stories of major corporations that were already thinking 3-4 years ago, hey, we can't have everyone tied to a desktop. Well, they were flexible, they were mobile, they were able to transition their workforce within minutes, and didn't have to really approach it from a holistic, oh my God, how much hardware do we have to buy for everyone, or how long are we actually shut down? There's a lot of success stories out there of thousands of individuals being right back up running the next day without any real change management or whatnot. There's huge adoption of all those communication solutions. And so everyone else is saying, well, hey, if you're going to adopt that technology, now you got to adopt, let's go all in. Let's just transform overnight. I think the smart approach is to still figure out what's best for the organization in a step-by-step process. So I mentioned this the last time, but Our partners at TC Energy have always been great to just take it one step at a time. My phrase is that I've always enjoyed is eat the elephant one bite at a time. It's so easy as an emerging technology company to try to promise everything and want to do everything in a pilot or proof of concept, but just take it one step at a time.
So from a management perspective of this then, so it looks like 55% of the people here are adopting, in the process of adopting some new technologies. So is it important, and how do you, or if it is important, how do you identify the right champions within your organization to make it successful?
I mean, it's extremely important. So we talked about some success and some failure. So I'm not sure if we want to go there right now, or maybe I'll just talk about I'll talk about the importance, and then we can share some success and failure from Vintri's perspective. But
Yeah.
There is I mean, we've been on calls this week even where individuals are asking us who we want to get in touch with. Well, there's always going to be a group that can help facilitate it. I mean, supply chain, we mentioned in the last call, supply chain is such a good position to help facilitate a lot of these items. But in many cases, the actual pain point and the budget to address that pain point might live somewhere else. So you always have to go at it from a strategic standpoint and figure out, okay, who has the budget, but then who owns the pain, and then who can actually put this all together. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's three different parties. So you have to be able to identify each of them. And then on the flip side, you have to, I mean, do your discovery and do your research, but don't try to get too many, what you might say, chefs in the kitchen. We can talk about that a little bit more, but that's a slippery slope as well, as trying to get too many champions.
Right. So I'm trying to learn the language a little bit here, and as I was doing some reading, I'm looking at, so we get beyond that. We know who the champions are now. We, maybe we have a general. Obviously, when we get to that point, we need to sort of deal with. I see two things that seem to be a bit of a mover for companies that are looking to adopt different types of technology. So one is they have some sort of silo within a company, and they're looking at a way to communicate differently or share information differently. Other times they just have a use case, so they have business processes that they're trying to improve or to change, within. So we have 55% that have gone through that process. Just before we jump into some of the wins and losses, I guess my question for the 45% would be, I'm here because I'm obviously interested in walking down this road. I maybe don't have a totally clear vision of what the silo is, or maybe I don't know all of the business processes. I don't have a use case yet. How do I sell this internally? Do I need to come to someone like you first, or do I really need to dial in what silos I'm trying to reduce or what business processes I'm trying to improve before I come to you?
I mean, there's a push and pull with every organization. So from the top down, every organization is going to have their quarterly, yearly, and 3 to 5 year plans of what are their main initiatives. And just like a developer takes like the overarching issue or topic and then breaks it down and breaks it down further. If you're doing agile, like boulders, pebbles kind of scenario, I see a lot of the major organizations doing that. They take the CEO's top 5 initiative, and then each group is breaking that down, and then seeing, okay, digital transformation is a top priority, going actual digital. Okay, well, let's break that down. What does that look like on a capital project scenario? What does that look like on an operational scenario? Okay, then break down capital project scenario. What are the different areas that we can find wins? What are we already exploring internally that we can do for ourselves? What have we already looked at in the past with other pilots or other proposals and presentations? And then that final step of, okay, what do we know that's out there in the market that we think we need to learn more about and go and pull some information in to see if this is actually an issue that we have internally. So yeah, a little bit of a political answer for you. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think that's what people are really going to be challenged with, I guess, to a degree too. I mean, you've probably seen it happen in different ways. There's likely no right answer, but you know, everyone needs to grapple with it's kind of a chicken and egg or a cart and horse scenario.
Yeah, and it's also I see a lot of collaboration happening where the owner operators are getting more in that scenario of sharing success stories with each other. So like I help lead the technology showcase for the SEPA Foundation. That whole scenario is around having owner operators nominate technologies that they've either done a proof of concept, a pilot, or their first rollout with, and they see it as being beneficial for the whole entire industry. They're not seeing that purely as a competitive advantage. They're kind of they're treating technology and innovation more like they treat safety. A lot of the industry has always, for a long time now, said safety is not going to be a competitive factor. We're going to share our successes and we're going to share our failures. Well, the industry is under so much stress right now from all the different factors, the political factors, the economic factors of shutdown, the demand factors of the product prices. I'm seeing a lot more of the industry treat innovation like they treat safety, treat quality like they treat safety, because realistically, the entire industry, oil and gas and pipeline, need to come together and help each other to tackle and combat against these outside forces. So you'll see it internally drill down and come out to, okay, we're looking for a solution that helps us with this, this, and this. But you'll also go the path of a new project manager comes over from company XYZ, and they were able to use some technology and see great ROI when they were using it over there. So they then introduced that. And they just introduced it as, hey, I don't know how this got brought in, but I know it worked. And that's usually a trigger point that, in a few of our cases, a supply chain person has then been paired on that and said, okay, I'm going to look into this. And from Vintri's perspective, that's where we get some of the funnest phone calls is, hey, your name got brought up. We want to learn more about this.
Right. So I read this in something as well, and there's it's sort of a definition for me again, and maybe this was, you know, just in this particular article, but is there a difference between a pilot and a trial? Is it different parts of the project? Are they the same thing? Were there just two words that the author chose to use, or are those, you know, similar or different words in your perspective?
There's definitely, I'm not educated on it. There's probably someone listening right now that could give us the exact definition of each. We personally use them quite interchangeable. For some unforeseen reason that I'm not aware of, I don't have the research behind it. I find that individuals are more open to talking about a pilot. Maybe it's because the industry uses pilot as one of their own terms for like a pilot facility and so forth. But a trial seems to be associated more with, well, our B2C kind of world of, hey, I can sign up for a free trial for Spotify or YouTube Music and stuff like that. In the B2B higher level, higher scale solutions, I've just always found that pilot seems to be the more popular nomenclature.
Right. Okay. So we come to you and we, you know, we walk through sort of the, you know, maybe we start off with a pilot. Maybe that's how we initially ramp things up. I know in my government days, we liked the word pilot. You know, it was a de-risking word in a way because we weren't trying to achieve necessarily, you know, world altering things, but we were testing things to see what would work for us, and a pilot allowed us more room to deliver a program, whereas just coming out and calling it a program would obviously require certain results actually be achieved. But so early on in the, when you get into pilot phase, or maybe the project is actually rolled out because you've walked through the project management, the development component of it. As we move through that process, is there a need to, I'm assuming there's an evolution that happens. I come to you with a certain list of criteria, things that I want to do, and so we set up some deliverables early on. But then as things evolve, maybe as the pilot's running, there's some things we want to sort of change. Maybe there's some secondary value things we want to increase. Are there do's and don'ts within this? Should we really just stick to deliverables, or is the customization more important? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think I'll take one quick step back in the pilot definition, because the faster that you can identify with your startup or your emerging technology company, whether you're looking for a paid pilot or an unpaid pilot, will really determine the path and how you approach the overall project. There is pros and cons with both, but just for the owner operators out there and the service companies out there that are like, hey, I want to take this, but in this market there's no budget. For certain emerging technology companies, and I can't speak for all of them, but a really well written and really well documented case study showing the exact pre and post analysis of the deployment of the solution is in a lot of cases more valuable than any budget thrown at it. Of course, in every startup scenario, if you can have both, that's ideal, but there's a lot of opportunity there where the value you can present back to that technology provider can be subsidized or replaced with the value of testimonial and documentation of results. So that's just one quick step back that I wanted to make sure I threw in there. But coming back to your question, the best advice we were ever given, and we learned kind of the hard way, it got caught early on in one of our pilots, was that I had created a list of about 10 deliverables on the pilot. With a pilot, the worst thing you can possibly do is have a ton of ambiguity around it, because as your champions and your partners within the organization try to get buy-in from their other groups, if they get asked questions and they don't have the answer and they don't have a very nicely defined term around and structure around the pilot, that's a quick way for that pilot to die. So we built out these 10 deliverables, and we were very fortunate. It was a supply chain individual. She came in late to the whole process. We were almost, I think it was almost signed. It was verbally awarded to us, and she came and gave us really good advice. She said, take this list of 10. What are the top 3 that you actually know you're going to be able to hit? Put those as your deliverables. Label those as your deliverables and build this whole pilot around those deliverables. The other 7, put those over into a secondary exploration or a secondary analysis kind of bucket that you think you're going to be able to show some value there, and you think you're going to be able to do some stuff. But if you list out this huge list of 10 deliverables, one of two things: if it's a paid pilot, you're probably going to have to do some potential CR or lose money to try to hit all of those 10 deliverables, and there's going to be a ton of stress to try to hit all of them. And also from a supply chain perspective, she explained to us that if you can hit 3 out of 3 and then there's these nice to haves, that's great. But if you shoot for just the 10 and then you only hit 7 of the 10, you and the project manager might think that was fantastic. But for supply chain, you just failed on 3 scenarios. So why would we go down a path that failed in 3 major scenarios that you said were deliverables of this project? Supply chain, rightfully so, sees a contract as a contract. You're going to deliver on these 10 things. You need to deliver on these 10 things. So from a pilot perspective, that's probably the biggest lesson learned that I was given 3.5 years ago. I had this beautiful list of 10, and this individual, she reached out and said, let's knock this down to the 3 that you can come through on, and the other 7 are going to be nice to haves, and everyone else can still analyze it, look at it afterwards, but you'll come through on those 3. And that really controlled the whole thing, and that allowed us to make sure that everyone always wants a price on a pilot, and usually the answer back is, well, we don't know what you truly want, we don't know how much this is going to take, and we don't know if you need someone on site to support this, so there's just too much ambiguity around it to give a final price. If you take that true deliverables down, then if you take it all down to the 3, then you can be like, no, I need this budget to hit those 3, and then we can have conversations afterwards if there's any more budget to pursue additional ones that, as we work together, we discovered that it required this or required that. There was a question that came through, did I hit all 10? So we hit 9, and the 10th one, we got really good feedback. In the pilot, we should have added a little optional line that said that we were willing to like chase down documentation and data on a low paid hourly basis. The reason we didn't hit 10 was they had to use a third-party resource to chase down a lot of stuff, and that third-party resource was at a normal field rate, and at that daily field rate, they didn't want to pursue that 10th item at that price. And in our contract, we had not given them an option for us to chase down that documentation. Lesson learned. So they axed that 10th, but yeah, we hit 9.
Can I ask for a little bit more? I'm really fascinated by this paid pilot versus an unpaid pilot on the case study side. So if I'm looking at this, and maybe trying to decide which direction is right for me, I'm assuming if we go down the paid pilot road, I'm doing, it's mine, it's my information, success, win or lose, that's all with me. It's not going to be shared outside of that. But if we decide to go down the paid pilot, because one, we can probably de-risk on the cost side, we can probably reduce some costs. I often find by bringing in some of those services like NRC, IRAP, and others, you can bring in some extra expertise, so you can de-risk some of that process a little bit. But then the challenge would be, from that pilot perspective, obviously there's a case study that's involved with that. Does that get shared, whether it's a win or loss, or their names involved in that goes out? So, how much is going to be shared about my experience if we go for the unpaid or the lower paid pilot with government support?
Yeah, I would say the low paid, unpaid. Well, and a quick little caveat there. Like our experience with Tecterra, IRAP, and other ones, a lot of those have clauses that the customer actually has to pay some. It can't be
right.
all coming from the government.
Right.
And the service company has to pay some, so that it can't just be all on like IRAP's dime kind of scenario. So there's good clauses in there to make sure everyone's essentially got skin in the game. But let's just come back to the unpaid pilot. That's really a negotiation among each party. It also depends on what you're approaching, right? So I can only speak to Vintri's scenario right now, but we find it extremely difficult to have customers that want to do any kind of case studies with us around our accuracy side of our business, our traceability side of the business, 100%, the accessibility side of the business. Everyone knows there's a common problem within the industry of we've got to get more access to actual data, not just documentation. We've got to stop all that wonderful data that gets created in engineering and procurement that then gets transformed into documentation before it goes into the next stage of the lifespan of the project. We've got to stop all that going into documentation and teach everyone to keep it as data so it can transfer over to the next stage of the project. But coming to accuracy, yeah, we've struggled for 8 years now trying to get someone to put their name out there with us and said, yeah, hey, when we analyzed this data, this was the error rate on it. So it all depends on what your solution is. I don't think I mean, I guess I could create it as a BHAG, but I don't know if I'll ever get a company that will really put their name next to, hey, we eliminated this many errors out there. Because to do that, you also have to admit that there was errors in the first place.
Right.
So we've had to switch our focus to the accessibility and the traceability, ensuring those are of the highest quality. And by doing that, then that's where we can start to get more use cases and studies out there. I can speak to 2 proof of concepts that we are working on right now in Houston. Both of them are going to be unpaid pilots, and the negotiation was that we can use their full names on the whole project. They are going to write up testimonials on it, good, bad, or ugly, around it. And the final caveat for us to go unpaid was both of the smaller midstream companies are owned by much larger groups, so they're going to share it into that much larger group. So for us, doing those pilots it's for legacy data, so historical information on a 15-year-old pipeline, and I think the other one's a 65-year-old pipeline. We want to see how efficient we can use OCR technology and other solutions out there to get all that old documentation into usable data. So those 2 small projects, both about 15-12 miles, unpaid, but we're going to have very good, clear use cases of the hurdles and the successes of digitizing that data. For us, that's worth everything, because what we have seen in the industry is only individuals scanning those documents and throwing them into digital file boxes and PDFs, and they've just gone from paper to digital paper. Or one of the individuals that we love on some of the podcasts, dumb images is what he calls PDFs. I love that one. So yeah, for us, it made total sense to just do, and we kept our scope down so that it's a small enough project. We're not going to get burned and really hurt on these. It's good research for us too, to see how efficient we can be on them.
So when we get into this pilot conversation, then, are there common questions or common points that you come to time and time again? Are there questions that should be asked or that get regularly asked, or are there certain points that we need to be aware of going into that pilot conversation?
I mean, the success we're having right now on getting new traction, because we have some very good paid, I'll say that too. We have some very well paid pilot projects. When we jumped from just pipelines to compressor stations and facilities, we were able to get near commercial value on those pilots, and make sure everyone was aware of what each group was responsible of and what each phase was going to cover. But coming back to your question of just some key points, the kind of a structure or framework around next steps is something you really have to go. If you go into like project implementation, it's the plan, right? Well, with a pilot, even if you get that champion interested, you better have your plan or your next steps ready as quickly as possible. You need to, even if you're not asking for a great deal of money from that organization, you're still asking them for time. And we all know, especially in these conditions, we've got even less time than we ever had before. We have less time to jump from one call to the next, one meeting to the next. So you have to really be able to roll out how much time are they going to have to invest in the whole project. Are they going to have to hunt down certain things? Again, have as clear and concise a plan as possible to remove that ambiguity. Once you have a plan of all the steps, you don't have to have hard deadlines, because you have no idea when they're going to get you some stuff. You just literally show this step then results in this step, that results in this step, and this is what it all boils down to. That would be the biggest one that I would look at. And then the key is having an open conversation and having a couple just general meetings where you lay out the plan, and then you let everyone involved or even indirectly involved, you truly ask them, is there anything else that you'd want to look for that maybe isn't a deliverable, an exact deliverable on this project, but it's a nice to know, or it's something that's been chewing at you from a different angle, and we can look at it from this perspective. Two warnings there. And I'll use a restaurant analysis. For some reason, there will always be someone on the virtual call or in the boardroom that just has the most ridiculous request possible. And as a startup and as the supply chain person trying to control this pilot, please just politely shut that person down. My restaurant analogy is that individual that goes into a really nice restaurant and doesn't want anything on the menu and just tries to ask, well, I would like this custom dish that you have to drive across town for the ingredients, and I would like all of it in the next 45 minutes. For some reason, I don't know if it's certain individuals testing the startup, or they truly just want that and they want to see if some custom dev can be thrown into this pilot. There's always just this random request like that. I've seen it in almost every situation. So from the supply chain side and from the startup side, definitely just control that one. That scope creep always seems to come in from left field. And then the second thing is just realistically, once you've got your next steps, then go around to each group and see what, don't leave it open-ended. Like, say, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you're looking for from this, that you're exploring to? And to explore those, what are you willing to provide to the pilot? So that you're asking for a give and take from the different groups. Because if supply chain is just going to say, I'm going to do this pilot, they reach out to all their different stakeholders and say, what would you like to look for this? And there's no give and take. They're just going to get a huge laundry list. So control that number. Top 1 or 2 is my advice. And then also, what are you willing to give, or how are you able to support this pilot to get that?
Yeah, so it sounds like, so getting into sort of a maybe some challenges, lessons learned here around, common issues that you see in pilots or early stage implementation. Sounds like stakeholder engagement or, stakeholder requirements maybe is, something that needs to be shaken out, and then scope creep. Are there other issues and challenges through these projects, whether early or later stage, that, whether they're common or something special to point out, kind of lessons learned in your perspective?
I definitely think, so going back to the terms, right? You've got your champion, you've got your decision maker, you've got your economic buyer that you're trying to make sure they all get visibility into this pilot or your presentations or proposals. It's very hard, but if you can try to get each of their individual expectations from the pilot, and actually I'm always saying get rid of the silos, but in this scenario, you kind of want their expectations in each silo so that you know what each group's looking for. I think I have a lot of basis around this because I spent 10 years on the staffing side of contract for project managers and construction managers and so forth. Trying to get 3 hiring managers to all actually want the same thing out of a candidate is very, very difficult. It's the same scenario with a pilot. Trying to get 3 individuals expecting and wanting the same thing out of a pilot is very difficult. Getting that alignment is quite hard. And if you don't get their expectations kind of individually in a one-on-one or as close to a one-on-one scenario as possible, then you're going to just have very confusing meetings, and you will have mid-project meetings and post-project meetings where one group is extremely happy, the other group thinks that you completely missed the mark, and it's because those 3 individuals or more aren't aligned. So stakeholder engagement, very important. I've got a terrible lesson learned there. Not terrible, it was terrible for us. It was good lesson learned. Define it. I'm very lucky that we have a concise data services team. The way they approach problem solving is they need all the details. So even though as a sales team, we're not that detail oriented, we know that we need to bring as much detail as possible back to them. Otherwise they're they're not going to be able to try to address the problem. And then final is managing expectations by first truly defining the separate expectations.
Yeah, I kind of share that myself. It's like you know, some of us like that big picture thinking of the project and get lost in the big pictureness of it. And then, but if you don't have the team behind you that can, you know, that has the details in mind and that has that focus, it can, you know, can really lead the project astray because you get, you don't have that underpinning. And I guess that's where, you know, being able to, essentially, you know, on the success side or the win side, you know, so you've got your, you know, your 3 or more sets of what success looks like for certain individuals, translating that into understanding the value or understanding the ROI in the project. You know, that I guess if you do that up front, you're going to hopefully have your KPIs in there. Or are you, is once you have the needs defined, does that naturally spit out what the ROI or what the success measures are? Or does that require more work, and what is it that you need to have in there, or that you've seen missing in something that, you know, that maybe needed to be there?
I would say, if I understood that correctly, the expectations usually aren't straight out like I need to see a 10x or a 15x or a 20x. They're more so I need to see this number versus this number, or I need to see I need to see the pilot capture this pre and post, and we'll give you direction on what KPIs to focus on. Once you have your list of expectations, a really strong next step there that I'm thinking of, our first compressor station paid pilot that we didn't do in the first 2 meetings, and we were freaking out, was we didn't go through their expectations and then qualify what were must-haves and what were nice-to-haves. By the third meeting, because we were literally freaking out that we couldn't come through on this individual's expectations, who had kind of entered the paid pilot late, we finally just sat down with him and said, okay, is that a nice-to-have or is that a must-have? And so much of his list was nice-to-haves. He was just like, no, I'm just working with you guys. Like, this is innovation. I want to help you with your roadmap, and this would be nice to have. This would be nice to have. For 2 meetings in 2.5 weeks, we were losing our mind thinking those were must-haves, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to possibly come through with those, because we didn't qualify them when they first came up and say, wait, is that a nice-to-have or a must-have? And well, the best is just getting them stack ranked from the individuals. So the expectations usually should be more generalized, and then the ROI and the case study at the end, you can't predict what all those numbers are going to be unless your solution really hones in on one specific thing. For us, some of our case studies, we get numbers back where how much paper did we save, how much time did we save in loading and ship out, how much time did we save in commissioning turnover because all the documentation and data was available early. Those are great numbers to be able to share. But then there's the ambiguous ones of, hey, you caught this issue before this asset went over to the next stage and before it went out to the field. If that had actually gone through and then got caught in the field, there'd be standby charges, there'd be reshipping charges. That's a long lead item. What's the number on that? And no one will give you a concise number because they don't want to take a shot at that. So it's just like, hey, there's some great value here, but we don't have a direct ROI. So getting too specific in your expectations will also kind of set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I guess it's good to ask yourself those questions, though, because sometimes there are costs you don't always incur. In manufacturing terms, we used to call it total lowest or total installed cost, I guess, is what we were getting at, because sometimes you buy something, whether it's technology or a piece of equipment, and you go out and you get a low bid, but you know, what quality did you get for that less money? Is it equal to, is it the same? And normally when you're paying less for something, you're not necessarily getting the same quality or the same speed out of whatever it is you're using. And if you don't find a way to calculate that, you make a blanket assumption as a supply chain person that you saved 10% because of the bid process that you used. but ultimately, what was the warranty, what was the quality, what were the other things that you gave up because you saved on that cost up front. So it's hard to value it sometimes, but you really need to ask yourself that total installed cost question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. We reference it like the total lifespan cost, because well, again, supply chain can be such a good bridge. We will talk to project management, and they're looking at that short term, real time. What can we save? On Vintri's PO, but also what can we save on the manufacturing of these assets? And then you talk to integrity management and operations, and if you get a real frank conversation from them, they'll be like, oh, we've got this many millions of dollars earmarked to have to switch this and change that and address this because we know what we're going to get needs to be reconfigured. And you're like, whoa, that's a lot more than the 5% that got shaved off over here. The disparate silos of the two different groups, not actually looking at the total cost is a huge value out there. The other one is our early adopters all had a cost of quality initiative. So they'd ask you how much you're going to save them, and you're like, well, I don't know all this stuff, but I know I can improve your quality by this. They fortunately internally have a cost of quality analysis where they can say, well, that turns into this for us from an ROI standpoint. So as more and more organizations have that cost of quality conversation, that definitely benefits us.
Yeah, it's something that is often difficult, and especially with larger companies, because budgets tend to be, can be siloed as like processes are, or like, so that it does become an issue because your budget and your costs are met, your needs are met, but then it gets handed over to maybe it's an operations function, or maybe it's just a control or quality function, and they tend to see some of the lasting effects of your early decisions that met your budget requirements. But because it's a large company and things get passed along, it's sometimes hard to capture that value in because you capture it in different buckets, and it's difficult to really measure out. So I've seen that be a struggle on many fronts for companies. But it kind of brings us back to this partnership between customer and supplier on the technology side. And I'll be honest with you, something that makes me nervous when, as a procurement guy way back in the day now, I don't know if I can call myself that anymore, but when I look at building a relationship with a company like Vintri, the technology is potentially going to evolve, or it because of the way we set up the pilot, it will absolutely evolve. And there's, to me, feels like some uncertainty in that. And especially if I'm just, I say just a procurement person, but if I'm the procurement person that's looking at this, and I do understand the needs, but I'm concerned about the evolution of the technology. I understand it's right for the technology, and it's hopefully going to be right for us because that's what I'm investing in. But how nervous do I need to be in that? Is that just because I'm uneducated in how this technology breathes and evolves? Or is that a real concern that I need to mitigate that risk?
Well, that's definitely a real concern you have to mitigate. I could not say any other answer. There's way too many horror stories out there of, especially if it's hardware based, the implementation of the hardware going in, and by day one it's already obsolete because it took so long to implement it. The rate of change is exponential with so many different things that you really have to partner with, I think, the bigger groups and the specialists to examine what technologies are sound and going to last the test of time, and what are buzzwords and flashes in the pan kind of scenarios. So I think I reference back to, I mean, Vintri got caught up in the DLT blockchain buzz, and we were able to partner with IRAP and really explore if we should change our entire product over to DLT. And because of a couple customers also being interested in that, signing their letters of interest, and IRAP supporting us, we're able to explore all the pros, cons, and benefits of that, and realize that we wanted to stay on a centralized ledger because of what we needed. Didn't mean that the solution isn't going to be around for a very long time. It just meant for material data at the time and the benefits that it presented for traceability and change log and all those different little attributes, we were able to replicate those on a traditional centralized ledger, and stick with not having to worry about a private chain being stood up in an industry where, unfortunately, the industry struggles sometimes to deploy Excel documents. So the risk of getting every one of the supply chain stakeholders to stand up their node in a private chain was far greater than us missing out on some benefits of DLT, which are great, but we were able to balance it out. Coming back to your thing, there's also individuals that are so determined that something's going to be exactly 100% correct, and that company doesn't even exist 3 years later. We're still talking about startups and innovations, and I mean, our numbers aren't as bad as restaurants where you can guarantee a certain number aren't going to be around. But I mean, a question I get on a weekly basis is, how do we know that we're going to give you our infrastructure data and you're going to be around in 10 years? So that is a real risk for everyone, especially in these headwinds where the too big to fails are leaving the market. So it's one of those that you have to explore. What are the exit routes for the technology? What is the technology today, and what is the technology tomorrow? So can the organization you're looking to partner with actually articulate a 3 or 5 year plan? Are they using tools that are well tested, and what they're building on top of has longevity and has a lot of security and structure built around it? So like for us, we build everything on Azure so that we can show that unfortunately, even if we didn't make it in the next 5 years, they could transfer all that data over into their own Azure cloud and not lose anything. Wouldn't be locked away by any means. A good startup, a good company will actually help their partner mitigate all those risks and show all their outs and all their exit strategies that they need to have.
Yeah, and so are you seeing then, so, you know, again, putting my manufacturing hat back on again, what we saw in, especially in steel, was, you know, that was obviously a going concern for a long time. Stuff's been made out of steel for many years, and the evolution of procurement was the way by which I mitigate risk is by creating contracts that get thicker and thicker and thicker to the point where you end up just signing it because you can't even really read it anymore. I guess you could adopt AI technology today that would probably read it and explain it to you, but back in my day, that wasn't really an option. But are you seeing that on your front, or is that what the expectation could be then within this, is that in order to mitigate this risk, we need to have, you know, a very large contract to do that? Or is it more simple than that to be overcome in the initial partnership development between customer and supplier?
I mean, the contracts are a good size, and for any startup out there, there's a lot of different organizations and legal firms that have partnered with, like the Zone Startups and others, that will help you get very affordable legal support to set up your own strong MSAs and protect your IP. But in many other cases, you're looking down at the owner operator's major MSA, and it's been, well, the funniest one I ever got adapted to was, it was a construction MSA that had been adapted for software and services, and it literally had a clause that needed like $10 million helicopter insurance in it. And we're like, sorry, no, no, we're providing you some software and no one's ever going to site from our perspective, so can't really agree to that one. So there are of course horror stories of bad contracts being adapted to something because your scope doesn't actually exist in their procurement procedures. But you need to protect each other's IP. You need to protect each other's liability. And I would say for most pilots, the reason the pilot needs to be pretty lean is you can't stop doing what you were doing and replace it with the pilot. You need to run them in parallel, so that if the pilot goes wrong, you still have your status quo.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to end on a win. I mean, it's good for, it's sort of where I want to lead us back to, because I think it's good to understand the contracting and the risk mitigation. But if we get too tied down in that aspect and aren't left with the idea that, technology is going to improve us if we, there's a challenge to get it right. And it's a significant challenge. However, there are resources out there to support you, quite a few of them today. But, you know, can you just give us an overview of, the wins, the benefits that you've seen from customers that you've had? What types of things have they experienced, and, what success stories have you seen happen in your time?
Yeah, so I mean, um, there's always like the wins that you expected that you went out to pursue, and some of the nicest stuff is when customers come back to you and say, "This was an unforeseen win. This helped us and supported us, and we didn't even think it was going to be part of this whole thing." And then they try to grow your scope right away to be like, "Can you help us here? Can you help us there?" So. Um, for us, I mean, the biggest win for us is whenever we find and flag any kind of issue earlier on, because time is money on every one of these capital projects. So um, there will be so many different groups that I'm thinking of one exact example. So uh, the project manager was kind of like, you know what, this is not costing us really anything. I guess I'll go with it. I'm okay with it. It's not a huge cost. He didn't really dive into what was going to be happening with any of it, and the first little section of it was just 13 replacement pipe for a small section replacement, and they just looked at our solution as a mega project solution. But we got the data in the day before that was supposed to load out, and there was major issues with the data on 3 of those pipe. Um, Very fortunate they pulled those 3 pipe off, threw a different 3 pipe on, and went out to site, and the section replacement went without a hitch. We were really lucky. The supply chain individual did the calculations of what it would have cost the project to have those 3 pipe go out to site, get flagged at site, then get sent back, then the construction crew do standby, then wait for the truck to come the next day with those last 3 pipe to finish everything. And the project manager was like, "Oh, so you guys exist for a reason." And he was being a little sarcastic and taking a little bit of a shot, but the nice win was he then sent it to everyone and said, "Hey, I know we've always kind of just seen this as, do we barcode pipe or do we not barcode pipe? But this is actually what they do." And he translated it. And I mean, that's 4 years ago. His translation of how he communicated the value from project manager, we jumped at that and said, "Wait, this is how we have to communicate our value prop, because this is why he didn't understand what we were trying to bring to the table before. But look, because he CC'd us on this, we now see how we should have communicated the value prop." So for us, the biggest win was actually learning how to better communicate the technology. I've said this before. There's some amazing technologies out there that will never get adopted because the individuals trying to bring it to market don't know how to communicate what it's bringing and what it's supporting the market with. They also don't have the relationships to have someone, if that supply chain person didn't take it on themselves to calculate all those different costs and give us that use case. At the time, we hadn't put that into the contract. This was a regular paid 13 joints start of a small project that was maybe 1,000 joints. There was no clauses in there, but the supply chain person was curious, and they did the calculation, rough estimate, and helped us win. I think we're on our maybe our 9th or 10th project with that utility gas distribution company. So there's a really good one. Another scenario that is more recent. It wasn't actually us. It was another Calgary-based startup, but they had been talking to us. They'd had conversations with an owner operator that we were working with, and we were able to do a kind of a proof concept, kind of do a workflow diagram of how the two systems would complement each other for the owner operator, and they were able to get the request from the owner operator to get access to our API, and they're able to throw our material data into their system, and that was enough to show everyone, okay, these systems all work together, this all flows together. Let's execute on a contract, and they were able to get their contract. That proof of concept for them took 2 days, not even 2 days, and they did it brilliantly. The first request was, oh, can you do this on a whole pipeline? They approached it that way, and then they're like, wait, all you need to see this on is maybe 10 pipe. So they literally just pulled information from our repository for 10 pipe, showed everyone that it still worked, but they didn't have to go down this $10,000, $15,000 pilot. They went down a zero cost pilot and just showed that it all can be integrated into the system.
Yeah, and I think that's where we see the gap as Supply Chain Canada is hopefully helping companies or supply chain people to, we've seen the technologies as well, and we can see the potential power of them. But when we talk to the technology providers, we hear how great they are, but we hear how flexible they are, and that's great. But it's also a challenge in that you need people that can actually understand what their issues are, what the challenges they're trying to overcome, and connecting the dots between the technology world and the actual on the ground at the coalface side. And so these events are meant to do that. And actually, Daniel, if you could bring up the final poll, I can, if there is any questions out there, we're happy to try to answer them. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I want to throw the final poll up, and if you could all take a minute to answer the few questions that were there, that would be great. Thanks for your time, Jeff. Appreciate you taking the time to kind of help some supply chain folks and companies in general walk through the technology adoption process, and hopefully we can continue down this path together, and can continue the conversation.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the time, and it's exciting to see what your organization's doing, the people that you're bringing forward. We were talking just before this started that you had Dan Griskew with TerraHub on there. We talked about the ecosystem. Elena and Dan helped me a ton when we first dipped our toes with DLT, and we're exploring the opportunities with IRAP and stuff. So this ecosystem of startups, actually, you'd be surprised how much we all know each other and want to help each other. So I think supply chain individuals in this market, in this industry, have such an opportunity to actually just explore, hey, XYZ, do you know anyone over at ABC? And they'd be surprised by how much we can actually do and collaborate. Keeping your emerging technologies in silos is just as bad as keeping your own groups in silos.
Yeah, that's great. And September 17th, for everyone that's out there, we do have a virtual reality event. It's about automation and warehousing. So there's a conference that's gonna it's a conference inside of a conference on September 17th. So we're looking at virtual reality. We have some artificial intelligence stuff coming out as well. So we're trying to look at the landscape of technologies, and kind of get everyone acclimated to this new world, and hopefully speed up the adoption process. So thanks everybody for showing up, and thanks again to Vintri for partnering with us on this, and giving us some behind the scenes insight into technology adoption. And we hope to see you all again at our next series. Thanks, everybody.